The Second World War is often remembered in terms of troop movements, strategic bombing, and decisive battles. Less frequently discussed are the countless civilians who endured the war in near-complete isolation, cut off from supply chains, shops, and basic provisions. Across Europe and parts of Asia, entire villages, neighborhoods, and rural households faced months at a time without access to fresh food, relying instead on whatever they could grow, forage, or preserve. The assumption that rationing alone defined civilian diets overlooks the improvisation, resilience, and knowledge that kept families alive under extraordinary pressure. The meals that sustained them were simple, sometimes barely edible, but they represented an intimate intersection of necessity, resourcefulness, and survival instinct. During periods of isolation, conventional markets were often inaccessible. Bombing campaigns, frontline advances, and occupation policies created conditions where ordinary foodstuffs, bread, meat, milk, simply could not reach households. In some regions, official rations were inconsistent or confiscated entirely by occupying forces. In Eastern Europe, entire communities were left to rely on what could be grown locally, preserved, or scavenged from forests and fields. The meals produced under these circumstances were not designed for taste, they were designed for survival. One of the most critical components of wartime survival was the use of root vegetables as the foundation of nearly every meal. Potatoes, turnips, rutabagas, and carrots were particularly valuable because they could be stored for months in cellars or cold earth pits. In rural Poland, families often prepared a simple soup of potatoes, onions, and water, sometimes adding a small amount of lard or fat when available. This soup provided necessary calories, even if it offered little variety. The reliance on roots underscores a key principle. When supply lines fail, knowledge of long-lasting staples becomes essential to survival. Grains also played a central role in isolated diets. In Germany, for instance, families often turned to potato-based breads mixed with acorns, chestnuts, or other locally available fillers when wheat became scarce. These improvised breads were far from palatable, but provided sustained energy. Similarly, in mountainous regions of France, families ground rye, barley, or even wild plant roots into coarse flours, creating flatbreads or porridges that could last for days. The use of non-traditional grains highlights a broader lesson in wartime survival. Adaptability and flexibility in food sourcing were as important as caloric content. Preservation techniques were honestly a daily necessity. Sauerkraut, pickled beets, and fermented vegetables, these were real staples across occupied Europe and rural Soviet territories. Fermentation didn't just extend the shelf life of these foods, it also provided essential vitamins like vitamin C, which, prevented scurvy during those long months without fresh produce. Many households constructed root cellars, dug pits, or even used snow-covered storage areas to maintain a supply of preserved vegetables through the winter. Preservation was not simply a matter of convenience, it was quite often the difference between life and death. Protein sources, though really quite scarce, were carefully managed. Families maintained small livestock, chickens, rabbits, goats, to provide eggs and meat when possible. In Norway and Denmark, a few ducks or rabbits could supplement rations, offering high-calorie protein when other sources were unavailable. Seasonal foraging also played a role. Mushrooms, wild greens and berries were collected from forests, providing both nutrition and a means of diversifying otherwise monotonous diets. These practices demonstrate that successful survival relied not only on access to calories but also on an intimate knowledge of the local environment. Legumes were another staple of wartime meals. Beans, lentils, and split peas were used across Europe to make stews or porridge, often combined with grains to create filling, protein-rich dishes. In Italy, these combinations were stretched to feed entire families, providing both energy and essential amino acids. In Eastern Europe, simple dishes of lentils and barley could sustain families through extended periods of isolation. These combinations illustrate a principle central to survival strategy. Careful pairing of macronutrients can really maximize the value of limited resources. Fat, though frequently overlooked in accounts of civilian rationing, was, absolutely critical for sustenance. Butter and lard were often rationed or, just unavailable, so households used rendered animal fats, nuts, and seeds to supplement calories. In Britain, wartime cookbooks recommended suet for baking, while in Eastern Europe, sunflower seeds or pumpkin seeds were pressed to extract oil for cooking. Even small amounts of fat could improve both the nutritional profile and palatability of otherwise plain meals, really demonstrating the importance of dietary balance under scarcity. Families also relied on wild plants to supplement diets. In occupied France, sorrel, dandelion, and nettle were commonly incorporated into soups, breads, or porridges. In the Soviet Union, stinging nettle and other wild greens were boiled to create vitamin-rich broths, preventing deficiency diseases during months of isolation. This practice underscores a consistent lesson. Survival often depended on detailed knowledge of local ecology and the ability to transform unconventional ingredients into usable nutrition. Dairy products, when available, were preserved and stretched to maximize their value. In Scandinavia, fermented milk, curd, and skyr provided essential protein and hydration during winter months. In Germany and Eastern Europe, cottage cheese or quark was combined with grains to extend meals. Even small quantities of these foods contributed essential nutrients that helped families maintain health when other options were limited. The careful management of dairy reflects a broader strategy. Conserving nutrient-dense foods can stabilize diets in prolonged isolation. Improvisation was perhaps the most important skill of all. Families routinely combined available ingredients into stews, puddings, or baked goods, creating meals that were functional rather than enjoyable. In Poland and Ukraine, thin vegetable soups might include a few scraps of meat or sausage when available. In Britain, victory puddings combined leftover bread, dried fruit, and minimal fat to produce dessert that sustained morale and energy. Across Europe, the pattern is, pretty much the same. Survival demanded creative problem-solving and the willingness to repurpose limited resources for maximum nutritional impact. The significance of these meals extends beyond mere sustenance. They reveal how ordinary families adapted to extreme circumstances, relying on knowledge, resourcefulness, and discipline to endure. These overlooked diets contributed to broader lessons in post-war food security, nutrition science, and preparedness. They demonstrate that survival is rarely about heroism alone. It is about planning, understanding one's environment, and applying practical knowledge consistently over time. Remembering these forgotten meals offers insight not only into wartime resilience, but also into the human capacity to adapt under stress. They are reminders that history is not only shaped by armies and treaties, but also by the quiet persistence of ordinary people. Meals, in this context, become a lens through which we can study human endurance, ingenuity, and the strategies that allowed life to continue even when the world was in chaos. If you value this kind of careful, in-depth historical analysis, subscribe to Iron Age Instincts. Share this video with anyone who seeks to understand not just the battles of World War II, but the strategies, knowledge, and daily practices that kept families alive in total isolation. The meals may have been simple, but the lessons they offer are enduring.